that this is writing an impactful manuscript discussion, but please note that the lessons you learn, it's also applicable to thesis. And to introduce this session, know that before you got here, you've done a lot of brilliant work. However, getting here will reinforce what you have done in a way that makes people discuss about your paper or your thesis. This is the point where you own and yourself would be expressed. And let me explain that. When you did the introduction of your thesis or your manuscript, what you did was unearth information that was already existing in the field. In the introduction, you never express yourself. The only point where you seemingly express yourself in the introduction is your research questions, your objective. That is where your thinking comes into play after unearthing the information in the field. So you tend to find that your introduction of your research or the literature review, which is the bigger expansion of your introduction, is full of references. It's full of references because what are you doing in that section? You're trying to tell everybody in the world what exists, what gap there is, and what you want to do. And for many others, when you're situating what you want to do, you're then bringing your theories or your conceptual framework to support what you want to do. So it's not your story at that point. It's other people's story, what they've done, and yourself is only that I want to do this research question. You then move on to the bigger piece, the major piece of your work, which is your methodology. Once again, the methodology is not you. It's using what exists in terms of standards. The standard ways of research is being done. You tell us your study design. You're not inventing a study design. It's not impossible, it's not impossible. But for the majority, you're not going to invent a study design. You would use existing study designs to do what it is that you want to do. You tell us your sample size, you tell us your study population, including your inclusion and exclusion criteria. You describe your tool if you have tools to use and let us know what it is and how it's standardized. You tell us your variables and describe variables. For most part, you would be using references to what exists. You then go on to your result, which is very important. And then you tell us what is the outcome of your analysis, be it qualitative analysis or quantitative analysis or mixed methods. You tell us what it is. We've gone through all that up to this point. Now you have to discuss. This discussion is the point where your brilliance starts to show, because your discussion starts to tell us, explain to us. And that's what our discussion is. Remember, the word is discussion. It's not highlighting, it's not pointing, it says discuss. And that discussion means you are explaining the reason why this result is so. And this is where you can say, I don't even know why it is. Oh, this result I'm seeing is so different from what the rest of the world has seen. Oh, this is explaining. And then you'll explain that maybe this is the reason why it's different. Or this result I'm seeing is the same as everybody has seen. But you must explain why it is like everybody has seen. Why? Because when you started at the introduction, you said there was a gap in knowledge. You said there was a gap in knowledge, and therefore you are trying to fill a gap in knowledge. So if at the end of the day, when you were filling the gap in knowledge, your result is exactly the same like every other result that you have seen, you must explain it also. It's like everybody else, despite the fact that, and then you must explain. So that's the big deal about the discussion. It is your brilliance. It is your brilliance. It is your thinking that comes into discussion. And this is the reason your paper is quoted. I repeat, it is this discussion that gives the bite for your paper to be quoted. It's not your introduction. Remember, your introduction is somebody else's literature review. You are bringing people's literature reviews. So they won't quote your paper for your literature review because they can go to that paper and read it and quote the paper directly. They won't quote your paper for your methodology because it's methodology, except you're doing something that is new. They won't quote your paper for your results, except they're doing systematic review or meta-analysis or scoping reviews, maybe, yes. They, those reviews, they might quote your result, but that's not the convention. But for somebody to quote your paper as a reference, it's your discussion. So that's why it's powerful. And you must learn how to do it well. So let's go into the myth. I am aware that there are other people that are not necessarily from IFE here. So please know that this program is organized by the Central Office of Research once again in IFE. And IFE is, for one thing, learning and culture. We do know IFE is the best there is. It's a standard university, the reference university. We're very proud of our culture, and one of which is open to the rest of the world to participate. But in case you do want to visit IFE at any time, please know that the Central Office of Research is open. You can find your way to the Central Office of Research and we will take you around. Just let them know that, you're from the short course. And that's all. That's all gets you a space. Even if you need a sitting space, like you want a break, a 1 week break, you want to find support for your research, come to the Central Office of Research. We have a desk for you. Believe me, and I'm not faking. We have a desk for you to sit around and do your research. So today I'm going to take you very briefly. The number of my slides is short and we're open up to a lot of discussion if you want to talk about things. And hopefully you'll be able to understand how to discuss and interpret your research finding, contrast and compare finding, which is unusual, and make valid inferences and be able to make recommendations. So I'll be taking you through this, using this outline. Why is the discussion section important? What should be the content of the discussion section? How you write a powerful, impactful discussion section that makes it possible for your paper to be quoted and referenced. And then I'll give the summary and the conclusion. Like I did say, the big part, or I always say the big part of a manuscript that makes it get into publication in the first place is your methodology. It must be sound. But the big thing about your thesis or your manuscript that gets it to be referenced is your discussion. Okay, but it's one of the hardest parts to write. I know that it's a lot harder to write that discussion section than the introduction. Methodology is almost like reading ABC. When you're starting primary school and they're teaching you how to read ABC, it's just to cram you. Methodology is following a standard. Get your reference guidelines. You know how to do that. There's no reference guideline on how to do discussion. So you must be a writer. You must bring the brilliance of literacy writing, like you want to write a novel that is engaging. That is what makes it tough. And because people do not recognize the need for the skills, they write a very brilliant piece of work so shabbily that it ends up not getting the traction that it otherwise should get. So it can be the hardest, but there's a skill to it. Once you know what it should be, then you put the flow to it. And that's why when we do these things, you cannot be alone. If you're writing your thesis, your supervisor becomes very important to help you shape and direct this. Even if you are a student, you don't need to just hang on to your student. Get other people, get your mentors that does not necessarily have to be your supervisor. Get your friends, your senior friends. Get people who are already, even if it's walking into your faculty or your department and going and knocking on the door of a senior person and say, please, I need your help to help me to read this and improve it. Many will open their doors to do it. Get the best to your supervisor so that it's just crossing the T's and dotting the I's. But they help you to get that narrative story. Okay, so it's an effective discussion section tells the reader what your study means and why it's important. What new things have you arched? What door have you knocked? What kernel have you broken? And I've got people make reference. I say, oh, I never knew this. Oh, it's a discussion that made me see this. Oh, people must learn something. This is the point where you're telling them, this is the eureka I've brought on board through my research. It is that discussion that opens them up to the eureka. And from your perspective, not necessarily from theirs. They can read the paper and see the result and say something else, but you must tell them the eureka story. It's your ingenuity. It's where you reflect on your concept, your issues, and share with the rest of the world your reflection. And this is the point where you start to share with them hypotheses that you're developing. And this is the point where you're talking them about future research. This is the point where you're saying, my story is of importance for policy. My story is important for the next step of future research. My story is important for programming. This is where you're helping them to see it. Okay? And once again, this is the point that makes your research important and makes people reference your thesis or your manuscript. So what should you see in your discussion section? You need to say the following for you to say you have written a discussion. Many people do not know, but if you can follow the step, many people don't follow the step. You might find it haphazardly, you're looking everywhere and you say, okay, it is there. But if you can systematically ensure that you follow this then it is clear that you have a good discussion. The first thing in the discussion section should be a summary. Be it thesis or manuscript. Your first paragraph should open us to say, this is the summary of your findings with respect to your study objectives. You must, it might be the first, it might be the first two, it might be the first three. For manuscripts, it's usually one paragraph, so most times, but for thesis where you have 3-4 objectives, you might be talking about 2-3 paragraphs or thereabout. But the opening paragraph of a discussion is the summary of your finding, using words that are different from the words you use in the research section and the results section, and you see why it has to be different. You cannot be repeating the results in your discussion. So for example, in the results section, I found out that 25% were females and 10% had tertiary education. In my discussion section, I'll be saying things like 1 in 4 participants are girls and 1 in 10 had tertiary education. Remember, this 1 in 10 and 1 in 4 is an interpretation of the 25%. One of the things I find many times is people writing the interpretation of their results in the results section. If you do that already, you now find it difficult to write the summary because you'll have to repeat the figures and the things you've done. That's the challenge. So try to distinguish this. Once you have a results section, write the results. Then when you get to the discussion section, the first paragraph, which is your summary, starts to show the interpretation of what you're finding without, going into details. So 1 in 4, if that is a quantitative study, if it's a qualitative study, you start to introduce, you must let us know what your finding is with respect to your objective. That's the first paragraph, or there about the first introduction. Many times when we get to the discussion, be it thesis, you just find people go straight to comparing and say the result. No. First, ease us into that section by writing a summary. The next thing you write, if you follow current standard, is the strength. What is the strength of your study? You see that it's the first study ever. It's working in a population that has not been done. It's using a methodology that had not been used for the same study. It's based on a theoretical framework that they had not used before. What is the strength of your study? Let's know that as a second paragraph. The third paragraph is usually limitations. I do know that as a convention for most people, the limitations of your study, if you are doing a thesis, the limitation of your study is after your discussion. There's a limitation. Some people have chapters where they have to write the limitations. Some people might have to write limitations somewhere. But in the manuscript, if you're writing a manuscript, the convention and the expected based on guidelines is that your limitation comes after the strength. And you write a limitation because people can look through the lens of the limitation to give meaning to your study findings. They must first be introduced to the bias, to the limitation of interpretation before they go to read the main thing. However, once again, I repeat, if you are writing a thesis, it's usually expected that you'll have a chapter or a section that is noting the limitations of your findings. Okay, and then you now go down to the meat of the matter, explaining the meanings of your finding and how they relate to what others have done. So you explain. Why did you see this? Why did you observe this? Why did you think they said this? Why did you think this theme emerged? You explain what is possible using existing literature, using your experience, and this is where you do a lot of new reading because you're explaining why. Why is this so? Why am I saying this? Why am I observing that people in Nigeria, as opposed to people in Kenya, but like people in the US, are thinking like this, are saying this, are finding this? This is where you have to start explaining. And many times it involves you reading anew. Of course, I've heard people ask, do you bring in new references at this point? Yes, because at this point you're saying something new and you have to explain it. So if you have to bring in new references, so be it. Your references is not limited to those references you used in your introduction. So you explain anything that is surprising, anything that is unexpected, anything that is inconclusive. You explain even those things that may otherwise not be surprising. But they should be surprising. Remember, because your work, be it thesis or research manuscript, you were answering an unknown. You can't come and do things because, we already have the answer, and then you're doing it. There's no research like that. Your research is saying there is something that we do not know, and therefore I am here to do this piece of work. And there must be a reason why there's not known and why that result must be important. So you must explain it. And you suggest, as you're going towards your conclusion, you start to suggest things for further research because you would have highlighted gaps that you couldn't address. And that's why when somebody picks up your discussion, they read from you. What is it for further research? And because they're going to go and do that further research, your paper becomes the reference. Because your paper is highlighting an unknown, is showing the way, the next path. Your paper therefore becomes a reference. In addition to that, please know that you must also include what your paper has done. Is there anything that is relevant for policies, for programming, for new ways of doing things, for new ways of asking questions? This is something also your discussion session can highlight. Very important to do this. Please note, when you're doing the discussion session, there are things that should not be. I know this is practically what many of us do, but please note that I'm asking to improve the quality of what you do. This is the way to go. 1, you don't repeat the data of your results in your discussion. It's a common error. So in your results, you got 25%, 30%, then you come in your discussion and start to repeat it. We saw 25% girls, 30% boys. This is lower than the 30% in Uganda and higher than the 15% in Kenya. You can raise those other figures, but you don't bring your data. So you can say the finding of my result shows that the prevalence of girls involved in fighting is higher than the 15% in Kenya and lower than the 72% in Mauritania. Something like that, and then you explain it. But you don't repeat your results. You don't bring your results from previous section, in the section. It's also very important that you don't bring new results. You are going to discuss the data that you have reported. You cannot be reporting new data in your discussion. Where did this data come from? You can't be reporting new data that is not in your results. This is basically for thesis and for manuscript. So what you're discussing is the data you raised in your results. Don't discuss data that doesn't exist. Okay? And then you don't discuss things outside the scope of the study objective. So let me explain this a little. So your study objective is to look at if girls, there are more girls that are bullies than boys. Okay? There are more girls that are bullies than boys. When you were doing this, you collected data that also included variables that you wanted to, adjust for confounding. So you included their age, you included their socioeconomic status, you included their employment, their income. And when you did your analysis, you adjusted for this. Of course, your adjustment will show maybe there was association between income and bullying. It showed association between age and bullying. But remember, that's not your objective. Those things were put in because you are adjusting for them. Your study is to look at gender and bullying. When you are discussing, please focus on gender and bullying, not on income and bullying, age and bullying, which was not your objective, but those variables were included in your analysis because you needed to adjust for them. Okay? It's called, if you do that, it's called the fallacy, a table 1 fallacy or table 2. It's a fallacy. You don't discuss the findings that is resulting from your associations. You can discuss your, and even if you do this, if your objective is that, and your objective was not to look at the proportion of people that are bullied, you can't be discussing the proportion. Focus on your study objectives. That is your discussion. I hope I'm communicating here. Many times we stray into discussing things that are not our objectives. When you're doing a thesis, you have 5 objectives, you have 6 objectives. Focus on discussing the objectives, and you can write it as sections and discuss your objectives. Don't waste 5 pages discussing what is not relevant. I see that so many times. It's not the way to go. It's not the way to do a smart piece of work. And I'm sure many people know that your thesis should be quoted. People quote thesis. Okay? And then when you're discussing, do not go making sweeping statements. For example, you saw 50 girls and 50 girls are bullied. Remember that your data was collected in University of Ife. University of Ife. That was where your data was collected. And then you now say, there are more girls that are bullies. It's only in Ife now that you studied. You didn't even study and it was only University of Ife. You didn't study in primary schools. You didn't study in secondary schools. You didn't study in polytechnics. You didn't study PG students. You didn't study in Lagos and Ibadan, and Kano and Enugu. It's only Ife. Then you now say, girls are bullies. No, that's a sweeping statement. You can't infer that beyond the people you have. So those are the kind of things that are sweeping statements. You must align properly your finding with your objective. And don't give unwarranted speculations. For example, you found out that more girls are bullies in Ile-Ife. And then you now say, we have to be careful because when girls become bullies, they cannot become leaders of this nation. And then and we wanted to look for the first female president. The fact that our girls are bullies, there's no place for them to be the president of the nation. That's unwarranted speculation. Your study did not find that. Your study did not go there. So why are you speculating and going in that tangential direction? The focus is that there are more bullies. What's the implication for Ile-Ife? Okay? And within the limit of your study finding, you discuss what you have found. You cannot be going haywire outside the scope of the study finding. Okay, and that happens when you're going tangential to the issues. Remember you are looking at bullying and in terms of university, and now you're starting to talk about becoming political leaders. That's not what your study is about, and how they're going to be presidents in future. No. Okay, and then finally, do not make conclusions that are not supported by your data. Okay, so for example, you found out that there are 20 girls that are bullying and 5 boys that are bullies in the Obafemi Awolowo University. Okay, and then you now conclude that there are significantly more boys than girls without doing a statistical analysis that is looking for significant difference. You are just concluding by the numbers that there's significantly more girls. That's an overestimation. That is a conclusion that is not supported by your data. You can say that the proportion of, or the percentage of the proportion of girls that are bullies in OAU is more than the boys. That's a valid conclusion. But saying that there are significantly more without a statistical analysis, that is is a stretch of the truth. It's not a valid conclusion. Okay. Can somebody put off all those videos that are distracting me? Please just put off the videos. So when you're talking about the discussion section, please, it's important that you make it, when you're writing, don't write as if you are the science or these science people that are grouchy. Make it like a story. You're telling a novel. Okay? It must be interesting. It must be relevant. It must flow. One paragraph must flow into the next. First of all, discuss the key findings, the ones that you feel are powerful, new, captivating. Discuss that first. And then link them together. Don't say number 1, there are more girls than boys that are bullied. And then you say this finding is less than what we found in Uganda, but it's more than what we found in the rest of Lagos. Then the next one, number 2, there are more girls in economics that are bullies than girls in health sciences. This is not similar to what is. It's not interesting. Okay, you link it. You do, okay, there are more girls, and then you explain more girls, but you find out that girls, the past studies have, however, shown that the variation in girls depends on the courses where they did, or it depends on the schools where they came up, or it depends on their geographical area. And this is also similar to what we found in our study. I've now linked it to the next one. I'm linking my first one to the next one, and then it makes it a story. It makes it a story. Treat it as a whole, not independent parts. Ensure that you have transition statements, and therefore the whole story of your findings are linked together, not as if they are separate and independent findings that are going on their own. It comes with skills, it comes with practice, but please know every single student, postgraduate student, undergraduate student, researcher can do this. It's a skill that comes to you, and the more you do it. So again, once you have done your discussion, you must write your conclusion. Your conclusion is very short. It's usually a paragraph. I am surprised when I see conclusion and I'm seeing 3 new paragraphs in the conclusion. That's an unusual piece when you're writing a manuscript. When you're writing your thesis, your conclusion is stating boldly what the answers to your objective. So if it's a manuscript, you state the most important thing, highlight its significance, and state the future direction. It's just 1 paragraph. For thesis, you just highlight the answers to your thesis objective. That's what you're highlighting. How you've answered your thesis objective. Your conclusion should not be introducing a new argument or introducing new data at all. Conclusion is the end of the story. That's what conclusion is. This film has come to an end. This drama has come to an end. I'm about to draw the curtain. That's what conclusion is. So you can't be introducing new arguments, new data, or you conclude without telling us what your finding is and why it's important and what the significance is. Then it cannot be a good conclusion. Your conclusion is that I'm drawing the curtains. I am now drawing the curtains on this story, or drawing the curtains on this research, and this is the most important things that I've found. This is the significance of this finding, and going forward, this is the way we should go. Okay, that's what your conclusion should be about. Once again, please, for those that have thesis, we recognize that institutions have ways or directions that they give you in terms of what you should write. Follow the regulations of your institutions as to what is the content of your thesis or the content of your, or the outline of your thesis. That's very important for those of you writing thesis. All right, so once again, the conclusion of your discussion. In conclusion, please note that discussion is what makes your paper quoted. This is the reflection of you. This is the reflection of your ingenuity. And it's your understanding of your study and how it results in new propositions or new hypotheses. And for those that use grounded theories, what is the new theory you're proposing? This is one of the two reasons your paper is quoted. And it's the most powerful reason why your papers will be quoted for many years. You find some papers, 1942, that's when they wrote it. They're still quoting it till now. It's because of the brilliance. It's not because of their literature review or their methodology. It's because of the brilliance of their discussion. That is what is making it still relevant 50 years after it has been written. So make yours one of those, okay? Make yours one of those powerful ones where you start to delve into your results and start to explain it powerfully. That makes people's eyes pop. Wow, I never saw this dimension. Wow. Okay, that's what your discussion should do. And it does that by telling a coherent story. You must use languages that reflect the study design. Do not overstretch the truth. Do not reflect your personal biases. This is also one of the places where you start to see personal biases. So you look at a study, you saw that girls are having girls and boys in undergraduate studies are cohabiting. And because you're a very religious person that does not like girls and boys to be cohabiting, then in your discussion, you now to start. You know, the world is going to an end. The sin of these people are becoming too much. How are we going to solve it? That's your story. Because in your heart, you are so biased because your upbringing does not allow for cohabiting. And therefore, the world is going to come to an end now. So I know that is a fast stretch. But this is the kind of thing we're saying that your discussion, remember that this is about sharing the truth. You can't overstretch it. And you can't be reflecting your biases there. It's about letting us see the truth from, you just put the truth, and all of us that are reading will reflect on it based on our own biases. It's not your biases. Don't discuss and interpret results based on your biases. Just present the truth that is and reflect based on what is known out there already, or what should be known from your perspective. And the discussion should always give new directions to all readers. On that note, I want to say thank you for listening. And please, if there's any question, I'm willing to answer at this point in time. Over to you, Dimeji.
All right, thank you very much, Marise. Merci beaucoup for the words of wisdom. And I know that everyone has learned a thing or the other. We now know how to write our manuscript, the things to include and not to, and also how to come up with our conclusions. Thank you very much, ma'am. And yes, for those who do not know, Professor Mrs. Morenike Ukpong is the Executive Director of the Central Office of Research. So we are so honored to have our very own ED take today's session. Thank you very much, ma'am. So right now we will take questions. So if you have questions, please do well to put them in the chat box, and I'll take them, and Prof would definitely give justice to them. Please, if you have questions, do well to put them in the chat box. I can only see one. I could only see one, so please, I can't see any other. If you have questions, please do well to put them in the chat box so that I could read and Prof would answer. The first, what I can see here is Prof. Suppose I found an interesting result from variables that are not part of my objectives. Can I suggest that for further studies?
Very great question. I see that it's Bashir Takil that asked that question. If you found that there are two things when it comes for finding. Remember, I talked about the table 2 fallacy. If your finding is a result of an association between your confounding variables and your dependent variable, ideally, if it's not supposed to be in the discussion, it's not supposed to show up, because you are adjusting. What is best is for you to go and report it as a new paper. So in your new paper, you now do a secondary analysis, which is not your primary analysis. You do a secondary analysis using that data where your confounders now become the independent variables. So right now in this paper where your variables were confounders, you treated it as confounders. Confounders are supposed to be silent. You are adjusting for confounders. It's like putting what is it when you're doing chemical reaction? You put something inside it to make the chemical reaction happen. They are silent. They're not feasible. So you can't be discussing them. You can't even be suggesting them because they were confounders that you were adjusting for. However, if you find that what you found in your back house or your back door, in some papers, they don't even bring up those results in the tables. It doesn't show up in the tables. So if you find that very important as findings, and of course, if you're doing your thesis, they don't come up. But if it is expected that once you do your thesis, you do your publication, you can then do you report on a secondary analysis, because that was not your primary analysis. That was not what you defined the sample size for. And then you now make these confounders dependent variables and report it. Then there's a place for that. But it shouldn't. I'm not saying people don't do it too. People do so many things. But confounders should not be found. They should be silent. So you shouldn't be reporting it. It's called the table 2 fallacy, actually. Read it up. Or maybe table 1. There's maybe table 1 or table 2, sorry. Because it's table 1 or table 2. I don't know which. I can't recall which one it is. Fallacy. It's a fallacy. It's wrong. It shouldn't come up. I hope that answers the question. Over to you, Deborah.
Thank you very much for the answer, Ma. Mr. Albashi, I think that was actually very, very explanatory. So Mr. Sunday has this. Regarding the approach for writing a discussion, does this also apply for donor-founded research that seeks to measure learning outcomes, for instance?
I'm very good, Sunday. Thanks for raising that. I think before there's another Sunday above that says, can you make recommendations in that discussion? So I'll take the two together if that's okay, Deborah.
All right, ma'am. Perfect, ma'am.
And discussion section is also where you make recommendations for manuscripts. However, please note for thesis, there's always a section that is recommendation, if I recall. But once again, remember, every school has their different outlines, and even within the schools, all departments or faculties have their different outlines. So if you're doing thesis, follow the recommendation of your institution. If you're writing a manuscript, yes, recommendations comes in the discussion section. But remember, everything is brief. This is not a place to write 2 pages of recommendation. It's supposed to be snappy and focused recommendation, which is focused on the objectives of that manuscript. With regards to Sunday 2, in terms of approaches to writing a manuscript, a discussion, and donor-funded research, yes, donor-funded research that is seeking to measure learning. I'm going to answer it this way. When you do a donor-funded research that is seeking to measure the learning, which means the project is based most likely on MEL framework, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and you have used indicators to measure your learning, then what you want to do is to write about the learning. It's an objective for the report. Then you focus on the learning. If your objective is to capture direct and indirect, once again, I'll go back. It is where you're coming from. Your discussion is answering your study objective. Your discussion cannot be going on its own the way it wants. It must be aligned to the study objective. So if your objective is to capture direct and indirect learnings, then your result or the discussion you are writing is about the direct and indirect learning. If your objective is to capture direct learning, then your result is only on direct learning. So your discussion must be discussing the results that emanated from your objective. So you see the link. You cannot be discussing results that is not in your, you cannot be discussing results that were not reflected in your results section. I hope that helps in a little way. Whatever you want to do, you must define it. Nobody is putting you in a cage of this is the way to go, or this is not the way to go. The big deal is that by the time you get to your discussion, you are answering, you are aligning with your objective, which had already aligned, which your methodology has already aligned to, which your result has already aligned to, and now your discussion is further aligning. So everything as a whole becomes a story. You don't get to your discussion and start to discuss things, and then everybody's wondering, where is this coming from? How does it link? And then you're forcing people to start thinking of how it links and giving the excuses. Oh, this is how I think it links. No, you'll be showing how it actually links. I hope that helps, Sunday. Over to you, Deborah.
Yes, ma. Thank you very, very much, ma. The next question we have here is by Godwin, Mr. Godwin. Which part of my results should I bring to my abstract section for a thesis? Which part of my results should I bring?
Very good question, Godwin. And I'm sure you know you're asking this because it's a struggle on how to make a summary of, you've done a thesis of 200 pages and then they're asking you to write an abstract of 3 pages. It's a struggle. And this is where you need help. Many times what I'll first do is write my abstract the way I want it to be. Maybe it ends up being 10 pages. The next thing now is to make it concise. As much as possible, in the case of being concise, focus on the study objective. Just answer the study objective without all the appendages. And that goes with the study objective. The critical thing is that your abstract must, in the results section, must focus. This is not the time to write all the descriptive variables. Okay? You know, in your main thesis, you will write all the descriptive variables, the income, economy. 20 people had no socioeconomic status, 15 had head bigger than, all those descriptive. This is not the place for it. What is the key objective? The results that answers your objective. This is where to put it, not all the paraphernalias. I hope that helps. It is a struggle to do this, but I think this is where GNS 001 starts to help. If anybody does not know the relevance of GNS 001, this is the very reason why you do GNS 001. How to make a summary, how to write a summary. I hope that will help you, Godwin. Over, Deborah.
Yes, ma. Thank you very much, ma. That helps a lot. Michael has this question. Please, ma, in a study of prevalence, if the result shows a higher prevalence, if the result shows a higher prevalence in male than female, can I compare the two, though the objective does not capture comparison?
That is every time you do a study, your study is to answer an objective. Okay, the study is to answer an objective. If your objective is not about comparison, it will be out of scope to be doing it. If you want to do it, go back and adjust your objective. But that's the challenge you oftentimes have to deal with. And I see it all the time. People have interesting things they are saying. The objective didn't capture it, and then they go ahead and start discussing all those interesting things. It's not aligning. It makes the story difficult. It makes it very difficult for the followers to read and align things. So if you now find it and you can still go and adjust your objective, go back and adjust the objective. Let it link with the